Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to go ahead and get started today. And I just want to take care of a few housekeeping rules before we get started. And my name is Julie Wright. I'm going to be helping kind of on the housekeeping side today and the tech support. So if you have any tech issues, feel free to message myself or Marcy here on the NCN name directly, and we'll help you take care of that. But we really just want to thank everyone for joining today. We're excited for the presentation from NCRC. And after their presentation, they're going to have a lot of time to answer questions. And so, what we'd ask today for this format is if you have questions during the presentation or even after the presentation, if you could please leave that message in the chat box. That ensures that we get the full question. And just in case we run out of time today, that'll allow us to follow up with your question afterwards, or if we need to follow up with additional information afterwards. So that's just always a great way for us to track the questions that come in and make sure that all of them get answered fully. And so again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat box. Once your question is being addressed, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a follow-up question or for any additional clarification, that would be a great time to unmute yourself at that point. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Pete Upton as he introduces today's webinar.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Pete Upton, and I am the Interim Executive Director for the Native CDFI Network. And I'd like to welcome you all today to the National Community Reinvestment Coalition webinar. And the intent of the webinar is to provide a background briefing on the Community Reinvestment Act and how the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, its departments, and its grassroots members organizations have applied organizing, data, and research to build wealth and to bring change. Again, the webinar is going to stress the importance of building relationships with your local bank officials and including a tutorial on how to acquire your local bank CRA exam, analyze the exam findings and apply them to your local efforts, and close with an update on NCRC's community benefit agreement process. I'd like to, first of all, thank Greg Wilson for reaching out. Greg reached out to me, I believe, in October or November, and he invited us, myself and Lakota, I believe, from Four-Bands, were a couple of the native CDFIs that were on there, on an event that NCRC had. And then I also like to welcome Catherine. And if I ruin your name here, Catherine, you can scream at me. Is it Petrus? Did I do good?
It's close, Petrus.
Petrus, okay. And then Juan Layton. Juan has an easy name there. And Juan is NCN's Director of Organizing, and Catherine is NCRC's Director of Organizing, and Catherine is the CRA coordinator and works with NCRC members and banks on community reinvestment campaigns. And Greg, you officially started with NCRC this month in your capacity as the staff.
Yeah, a week and a half ago.
Congratulations. So I'm excited to work with NCRC. I met with the president and CEO of NCRC a couple of years ago, Jesse Van Tol. And so I've been wanting to connect our NCN members to NCRC for a number of years. And this is a great opportunity to get an understanding of the CRA credits and then the revisions that were made to the Community Reinvestment Act in 2020, and they have been rescinded back to, in October, they got rescinded back to, I guess, the original format of 1995. So there was a lot of work and effort in Indian country to get the CRA the Community Reinvestment Act modernized. So all that hard work has been pushed back until they come up with a new ruling. So I know that our members will probably have some questions for you about that, but I don't want to spend any more time you guys listening to me. I want to get right to our guest speakers today. So I will turn it over to, is it Catherine? Are you going to lead us today?
Juan will start.
Okay, Juan.
Thank you, Pete. And again, thank you for having us in this webinar. We're so excited and happy to be here today and present and share sort of like our best practice and organizing on community reinvestment and CBS. We just wanted to say that this is like our approach. We want to check how we have been approaching this work. It might work in some cases, in other cases might not work. I think it's sort of like all what we're intending today, sort of check how this is working for us and how we are succeeding in doing this work. Having said that, also, I think we're very excited about building the relationship with CNC. I think it's a big potential for like collaborating here. So I have to really kind of like say that we come here with like a big open our arms and be kind of working with all of you today here. So we will review the history of NCRC. As Pete said, you're going to get a tutorial of community reinvestment, CRA exams, and how they look like in a real practice. And then you will get an update, an overview of our community benefit agreements and how they work with communities. As it was said in the beginning, just save your question to the end. And also you will get all this information. So you will get this PowerPoint and it will be sent to you. So no need to sort of write things down in terms of like how we're saying other than questions. Okay, so I'm gonna have now a newest addition to NCRC, Greg Wilson, to go next.
Thanks, Juan. Go ahead with the next slide. We here at NCRC look at a bank like any major institution in the community. We want it to be an anchor, and we want it to have and meet the obligations of an anchor institution like a good school or a good hospital. So a bank has all of its assets and our deposits federally insured. So we think that is sort of like an agreement where if your taxpayer dollars are federally insuring that bank's deposits, that bank has an obligation to be a good community citizen, a good anchor institution, and provide a public benefit to the community. Next slide. So that's how we view the role of banks. And our worldview at NCRC is primarily framed by the Community Reinvestment Act. And for those who don't know, there was decades in the 20th century where redlining and a lot of discrimination happened when it came to lending to folks of color or people in low-income communities. And the federal government tried to address those through the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit and Opportunity Act, and the HMDA Act, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. Now, the Fair Housing Act was designed to prevent housing discrimination. HMDA was designed to provide information on where things are being lent and what the lending practices are like. But what's unique about CRA is a continuing and affirmative obligation on the part of banks to meet the lending and credit needs of the entire community. And we believe that's a distinction that is a big difference, all right? And that's where community organizations come in, like the one I've been working with prior the previous 10 years. For a decade, I was a community organizer here in the state of Delaware. I helped pass payday lending reform in 2012. And as we'll describe later about the NCRC conference, I went to a conference and I met 500, 700 other organizers and community leaders, people that led CDFIs or CDCs. And it was just a really edifying experience to go to workshops and things like that. So NCRC views the CRA as a way to bring about lending and credit, meeting the lending and credit needs of everybody in the community, but it takes work and it takes effort. Next slide, please. So this is a slide presentation that's going to be left behind for you all to look at. And basically how NCRC works is we have a housing division that does housing counseling. We have a version that does a lot of research and high-tech folk that crunch a lot of numbers and HMDA data. So between our housing counseling, our home repair department, our quants, and our research department, we have an umbrella of spectrum of services that are within the CRA portfolio. And so we here at NCRC work with local organizations to help them delve deep into their CRA exam of their local bank and find out where they're performing well or not so well. And then we also, this is how I met Pete, we develop coalitions of community groups within a bank's service area to come up with a community benefit agreement. That's what Juan will talk about in a little bit. Next slide, please. So when you think CRA, a lot of people don't realize that lending is 50% of how regulators evaluate their CRA exam for a bank. Investments like a quarter and service is a quarter, but between lending, the lending test, the investment test, and the service test. That's how the OCC or the FDIC evaluate how well a bank is serving their community under the CRA. And again, I just wanted you to see that pie because Catherine's going to delve in deeper, but I just wanted you to visualize the lending component is very important. Next slide. So then again, it's like, what would be the lending test? It's mortgage lending, it's small business lending, it's consumer lending, and community development. And I think that portion will be very of interest to you all here regarding CDFIs. So now I'm done my little section of just giving you a brief history about CRA, how NCRC has been fighting for it for since 1990. We have 500 to 600 member organizations around the country that are engaged locally with their local banks and their local bank officials, and establishing relationships with your bank is very, very important. But right now, Catherine's going to sort of lead us down the path of how you look at a bank's CRA exam, CRA evaluation. Catherine?
Hi, everyone. So this is going to be a very high-level tutorial that will hopefully give you an introduction into how to find CRA exams for banks that are in your communities and how to start to research what they're doing and evaluate whether they're really achieving CRA goals in your communities. Again, it's going to be very high level. I only have a few minutes, but this is one thing NCRC does a lot with our members. We just really dive into the research and data with our members to pull out important things that are going on or not going on in bank activities throughout the country. So the CRA exam that we talk about is actually referred to by regulators as a performance evaluation. That's an important vocabulary distinction. If you're doing a Google search, you want to look for performance evaluations that are done by FDIC, Federal Reserve Board, or the OCC. One of those three regulators will do the CRA exam for all banks in the US. The exams happen every 3 to 4 years. In reality, sometimes the period between exams is longer. If a bank gets a low rating, then it might be a shorter period in between exams. That's one consequence of getting a bad CRA rating, is that the examiners come back within a year or a year and a half, and banks don't like that. So CRA ratings are based on an evaluation of bank activities in different areas, and Greg talked about this earlier. These are 3 component tests that are part of every CRA exam. The regulators look at lending, investment, and services. Services refers in part to where the bank's branches are located. The regulators also use assessment areas in their exam, so they will apply each of these 3 component tests to every single assessment area, which is a geographic area where the bank has branches. And the bank is going to use data analysis, bank records, and public comments in coming up with their final CRA rating. So this is where you all might come in submitting letters to the regulators about banks and what they're doing in your community. That can become part of the bank's public CRA record. So CRA ratings fall into 4 categories. Outstanding and satisfactory would be a passing rating, and then there are 2 failing categories. Since 1977, 98% of CRA exams resulted in a passing score, which I think we can all agree would have been quite a luxury if when we were in school. I would have loved to go into a class knowing that 98% of the class is going to pass, and so I wouldn't have tried very hard. So that's why NCRC's work and the work of our members is really important to enforcing CRA and making sure it's as impactful as it was intended to be. This is an example of what I think of as the report card in the CRA exam. You'll see a table like this in every exam that you look at. Again, 98% of banks get passing grades. You rarely see a substantial non-compliance or needs to improve overall rating. The consequences of those failing ratings are really bad for the bank. It means, like I said, a shorter time in between exams, but it also means that while the needs to improve or substantial non-compliance rating is outstanding, the bank will not be allowed to merge, acquire other banks, or sometimes they won't be allowed to open new branches by the regulator until they've demonstrated that they've improved their CRA activity. Another report card to look for in the CRA exams is at the end of each exam, usually in an appendix, you'll see a more detailed list of ratings that are broken down into assessment areas. So this is where you can look for your state, for example, if you're in Texas and you see this bank got substantial non-compliance. And the example I'm using is First National Bank of Omaha, which is a bank that Pete Upton mentioned. He is in his community and has worked with his organization. So if you see something like this, a substantial non-compliance or low satisfactory rating, you can then go back to the Texas section of the exam and find out what's going on that triggered this really poor rating in the services test for Texas for this bank. So again, you'll get these slides after today's presentation, and this slide has links to each regulator's CRA page where you can pull CRA exams. If you are interested in researching a bank and you don't know who their regulator is, a good place to start is always the FDIC institution directory. And I'll take you to that page now, but that's where you can type in the name of a bank, and then you'll find out a lot of good information, including who their regulator is. So let's type in First National Bank of Omaha. So you'll often pull up several banks here if you're searching for a bank with a really common name, but luckily this one only has one result. So we'll click on that link, and up at the top of this page from FDIC, you'll see primary federal regulator, and that's the OCC, but you don't want to click on this link. I think it'll take you to the main OCC page, which is a bear to navigate. So down at the bottom right for each bank will be a link to the CRA rating for that bank. And you're not quite done. This will not take you to that bank's exam. It'll take you to the OCC CRA page. And then you're going to have to find performance evaluations on that page. Click that link. Still not done. You have to type in the bank name again. And now we have a link to all of the First National Bank of Omaha's CRA exams. I'm going to open up the most recent one quickly here. And here it is. So you'll get a PDF of the exam. This one is 178 pages, which is a really short CRA exam for national banks. They can be up to 1,000 pages. And that's because there's a discussion section for each assessment area in the CRA exams. So I think I'm almost out of time, but I wanted to just show you the table of contents is where you can usually hyperlink to different regions and see, for example, in Texas, if I click on this link, it'll take me to the Texas section. And there's always a discussion of some highlights of community development activities that might be interesting for you all to look at. And again, this is where Texas, I won't scroll through it, but this is where the OCC discusses why they got substantial non-compliance for their services test. And it has to do with branch locations in the Dallas area not being accessible to the entire community. So I'm going to go back to the slides and turn it over to Juan.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'm going to talk now about the community benefit agreements. And most of us are familiar with CVS. There could be CVS when somebody's building a stadium and then you sort of like agree to sort of like jobs or for housing. In our case, we develop an approach with banks. And pretty much this, I mean, like one thing that I had to say, this is like, as Greg was talking about, this has been like a fight for many years to gain this oversight that regulators have over banks. And there is a nice quote here that I'd like to read to you from Gail Sincota, who was one of the leaders who was able to sort of like advocate to get CRA in place. And she said, full responsibility for CRA enforcement has always been the job of people in neighborhoods. And why this is so important, because I think in addition to sort of like the regulators, we need the community and the organizations to be at the table and enforce these different rules. Remember, CRA, I like to say, is a tool. And if nothing is going to happen if we don't enforce it. So the community benefits, and you can go to the next slide. There is as Catherine was talking about, there is this performance evaluation, and there is a very close, regulators pay very close attention when banks are merging, when they're buying out another bank. So there is an opening where like organizations can come and provide commentaries, and also like we can organize ourselves, and through that we came up with this community benefit agreements approach. Because what we do through that, we pretty much negotiate with banks agreement where they will agree how they're going to sort of like actually do this, how they're going to sort of, the performance is going to look like in the next 3 or 4 years. So pretty much we see CVAs as an agreement between banks and community groups, and I think and when I say that, I really mean it. That's why when we met Pete, we invited him to come to a meeting with a bank, and it's because we wanted to have the organizations at the table talking about different issues, and for the bank to listen to the community groups. So as it was said before, NCRC has many resources, and one of these is sort of to be sort of like a facilitator between organizations and banks. And we have the capability in-house to sort of like begin analyzing the data, like the lending data from the banks, and how that sort of like, and how they performs when it comes down to developing community development. So I think that helped us to sort of like convey that information then to organizations, and sort of like take a very close look at how the banks are performing in low and moderate income communities. Next. And the step 2 is where like we really sort of do a lot of work to bring organizations to meet with banks. And we have this format where we ask banks to meet for 2 hours, pretty much sort of like, and listen to what community organizations have to say, not just about the issue, but also about proposing different, doing different proposals or giving different proposals to the banks. So I think we like to sort of like, we want to ensure that community organizations are very active in the process. And for that, we always sort of like have them at the table. Next. So this is like, as I said before, the CVAs work as a collaboration between, it's pretty much we see as a collaboration between banks and community organizations. And this is a dialogue that pretty much sort of like is based in negotiating how like a bank will have the CRA for the next 3 or 4 years. I think it's important also to see that we develop like accountability sort of like processes in which we want to monitor how the bank is going to be performing, and for that, with organizations that have been involved in the process. Some of them become members of this community council that we help to set up, that will oversee this process in a period of time. So next. So if you want to have more information about how this CVA works and kind of take a look into sort of like the different agreements that we have worked through the past years and even last year, you can go, we have had the links, you will get these slides as it was said, and then you can click to the links and pretty much it will take you to sort of all these places where you can see how this work in practice. I think that's okay. And also, I mean, again, this is a relationship building, but we always say that organizations can become members of NCRC, and then we also like can work with you as needs come up or help you out with research and things like that as you become a member. Also, we provide trainings. We have events. We have a conference coming up next year, and we love to see you there. It's going to be in DC from June 13th to the 15th. So that's what I have today. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Juan. The thing that with our CRA credits, I'll tell you how we kind of got involved with them a little bit, was we had to develop a long relationship with our local banks. And I met with, 2, 3, 4 of them. And CRA credits, they're kind of a strange relationship to a certain degree, because you have to build that relationship before your community reinvestment bank employee is going to feel comfortable, whether it be making a loan to you, a low interest loan with very affordable terms. And we started out, and it took me probably 3 years to get my relationship really built to where they felt really comfortable with us. And we communicated by telephone, in person, and in one-on-one meetings, and kind of telling them of the things that we were doing. And it wasn't for me that they came running to my door, knocking, the door down to work with me. Although First National Bank of Omaha, they were the ones that reached out to me, and they've been very good supporters of Native 360. And they kind of, 2, 3, 4, 5 emails of wanting to set the meeting up. So I knew that they were anxious to work with us, but I think it just takes a little bit of interaction and some time to build a relationship. And I know sometimes people think that they're required to come and knock on your door, and I don't think that's the case. Is it, Catherine or Greg or Juan?
No,
I
they're not.
was going to say, I'm sorry, you have to be aggressive. You have to reach out to your local, I'm sorry to interrupt there, Juan. You have to reach out to your local bank official, find out who, the loan officer is for your community, or the CRA officer in the community, and give them a tour of your facility. Let them know about the good work that you do. If it's a phone call or a Zoom meeting due to COVID, give them a tour of your website. Have them look at your different programming. Sometimes it's helpful to establish a partnership with an organization that already has a relationship with that bank. So that way you have someone that's already sort of verified who you are in the community by partnering with them. And then that's a way to ease into that development of a relationship with the bank. It takes time. And sometimes CRA officers or lending officials at a bank, loan officers move on to other banks. So it's a process that constantly has to be, you have to constantly till the fields, and you have to fight for your own best interest.
And that's one thing that happened to us recently. Our CRA bank representative, he's moved on to another bank, and now I have a new CRA employee working with me. But I think the thing that I found is that the networking that they plug you into in their community is amazing, because from that one CRA credit, and now they've done 2 different upped our loan amount at a very low, very great interest rate. But they plugged us into 2 or 3 different community organizations that have since funded us. And the other thing that First National Bank was great working with is we have a CDFI in Montana who was negotiating a rate up there, and we felt it was extremely high. So then we got our bank representative involved with us, and we actually supplied the loan documents for the bank up there because they had never done a CRA loan. So we helped them navigate through it. But it's, their willingness to step up and kind of negotiate with us behind the scenes to get an affordable rate for them in Montana.
And Nancy Jordan just made a good comment about developing a relationship with the small business development center in her area. And it's a networking exercise. It's a being able to talk to folks, find out what their needs are. Sometimes a local bank has certain initiatives that they're engaged in, and that may not be in your wheelhouse as a CDFI locally, but you may know someone else who's right in line and in sync with what that bank's priorities are. And by you recommending somebody else, showing grace and saying, look, that isn't in my wheelhouse, but I know that, this other person, X, Y, and Z organization is very good at doing exactly what you want to do, then you become a valued asset to that banker or to that loan officer or that CRA officer that says, I want to call up Pete Upton. I've got a question. Maybe he can help me out. So then that slow process of developing that relationship by providing good information about what's needed in the community or who's doing good work in the community. Sometimes people get a lot of public relations and splash in the newspaper, but they don't really deliver. But other people who are like more workhorses than show horses, it's helpful for you to help that banker meet those people that are doing good work.
The other thing that I found out, Greg, was that if you do a little bit of snooping and searching, like on a lot of the local organizations, nonprofits that serve low-income communities, a lot of times you're going to find those CRA officers on other boards in the community. So that's why it's really good to attend, like if the Federal Reserve has a lot of times they'll have a meet and greet session, or different organizational events, Chamber of Commerce. It's good to get in the loop with those people because they're going to connect you. And as native CDFIs, I know the challenge is a lot of banks don't serve Indian country, but I think we just have to keep pressing the narrative that we need the modernization of the CRA Act, and really keep pressing our policymakers on it.
Exactly.
And I think that this is an opportunity. It seemed to me that, like what you mentioned at the end, Pete, that by forming coalitions, like putting pressure, like I think coordinating with NCRC and working as a bigger entity, in some ways we put pressures on the bank and the regulators and the legislators at the same time. So I think that's a very good point, and I feel that that's aside from the relationship, because on one hand we need to make banks accountable to CRA. On the other hand, sort of like you have to build the relationship, and third, we want to ensure that they are serving all communities as they are supposed to. So I think that's organizing in many ways, right? I think we need to sort of do that.
Can you provide us an update on what happened with the CRA modernization that was passed in 2020 and then it was rescinded?
So I can, I don't know if we have any updates right now. I think we're in a holding pattern. The OCC rule was rescinded, and OCC has indicated that they will collaborate with the FDIC and the Fed to create a new, to create a new CRA rule. But I don't think we've seen any rulemaking yet. We do have a page on our website, which is a toolkit for members and non-members to engage in policy advocacy work to strengthen the CRA. And this is the part of our website where you will be able to find updates on the CRA modernization efforts going on right now. But this is a great time to engage with NCRC because we're sort of at the beginning of that rulemaking process, or actually before it's even started. Now they've started over since OCC rescinded that rule. And So it's a good opportunity to get involved in that regulatory policy process with policy advocacy.
And Pete, we've had some internal conversations on our end, and I think you and I can circle back, and we'll be able to give you more detailed follow-up information as to where NCRC is in the process. Catherine and Juan and I have been meeting and discussing it and talking to our research team. So when Jesse comes to speak in a couple of weeks, we'll probably have a more robust or analysis for you for your edification, if that's okay.
And then can you tell the attendees today that are on the call is a little bit about NCRC? Is that it's a membership organization, and as a native CDFI in Nebraska, can we join your organization?
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the elements of NCRC is that it's made up of community groups in rural America and in inner cities and suburbs, people of color, Latino, African American, Asian. And, you know, the application, how to join or become a member is one of our slides here. But when you do become a member, you get access to some of the research skill sets of Catherine and members of our team. And we want to be able to support you all in your efforts. And we know CRA hasn't been performing well in Indian country, and there's a wide berth to improve upon. And we would like to be a part of that change and improving the lot in life for a lot of folks that aren't being properly served by CRA presently.
Yeah, I would like to acknowledge Ian Records on our call today, and Ian was with the National Congress of American Indians, and Ian did a lot of work on the modernization of the CRA when he was there. And, you know, offline, we've had conversations on disappointment that it was rescinded, but Ian, do you have any insight for us? Putting you on the spot.
Put me on the spot.
Yeah.
I really appreciate a very informative conversation. And I think, you know, the pressure that you guys talk about that has to be exerted has to be twofold. It has to be at the local level, and it has to be at the federal level. And obviously a lot of at the federal level, a lot of the decision making is in the hands of those agencies you mentioned. And it's frustrating that they've hit the reset button after all the work in education, honestly, that we put into educating the previous administration about just how severely underserved Indian country has been by the existing CRA regulations, and how modernizing those is long overdue. And, you know, the OCC rule, the modernized rule had, you know, close to 70 references to Indian countries, you know, specific sets of incentives designed to really foster greater commitment and participation, and really for particularly the larger banks, getting them beyond this sort of seeing Indian country as sort of a check the box exercise, where let's just do the bare minimum to, you know, make sure we stay in the CRA safe zone, and then we're not really, you know, interested in a genuine commitment of relationship building that Pete's referred to, that it takes to understand not just Indian country generally, but the specific, you know, tribal nations and lands that, you know, are in your coverage zone. And so I think, you know, everyone on the call needs to think about, you know, what can we do locally, regionally, and also federally. You know, I've been thinking during part of this about, you know, how can native CDFI network be helpful in data? You know, it's having the native CDFIs, the tribes, other folks that need capital in tribal communities in certain areas, understanding what banks are even out there that are beholden to CRA, and how can they start to build those relationships.
That's a good point. We had a good conversation with Pete, and Lakota Vogel made a subtle point that, you know, US Bank, I think it was the call, needed to hear that when it came to South Dakota, a lot of the lending was on the coasts of the Dakota, but not in the central counties where a lot of jobs are when it comes to affordable housing. So those subtleties and information that we can get from tribal members or native CDFIs is very informative and illuminating, right, when it comes to having the bank understand that there's opportunities to performing a lot better when it comes to CRA. Well, we'd like to follow up with you, Ian, if we could. It'd be great to touch base with you.
Sure, no problem.
yesterday I sat on a webinar, and it was it's a subcommittee that was sponsored by the OCC, and it's the native home ownership subcommittee meeting, and it was focused with the banks that the OCC regulates, and about if I'm not quote, you might want to fact check me on this, but I think there's about 500 banks on there, and the question was, trying to figure out why the banks aren't serving Indian country. We already know they're not. So there were several polls on there yesterday, an event on why they're not. What are the obstacles? What are the fears? And so there's eventually going to be a white paper put out
great.
from this subcommittee, but it just takes endless amount of work. And you've got to be at the table. The leaders that are on the call today, like if you can get involved in your any local committees that you can be on to let the voices of Native Americans be heard, you really need to, volunteer to serve on some of these committees, these boards and things of that sort. But, I know for us, CRA credits have really upped our game a lot. And again, I can't thank the First National Bank of Omaha enough, because they've got us connected in their network, and that's huge. But is anyone else on the call that has CRA or has been successful in getting CRA credits that would like to maybe say something? Dave Tovey, I see you guys kicked out John Stockton from attending any of your games.
Yeah, I'm actually going to the game on Saturday as a guest of the Coeur d'Alene leadership, but everybody's asking us, did we take his season tickets over?
Nice.
Do you guys participate in any CRAs up there?
No. We're, I think in part prompted by that SSBCI opportunity, we're making outreach to our two primary banks, the one we use, the one the tribal government uses, as well as a credit union. So we've talked to them all, just an initial exploratory, but that's why we were both, Becky Kane and I, my CFO, are on this call, just kind of getting boned up on approach. So it's been helpful so far.
Yeah, we approached the bank in Omaha in 2014, and at that time he said that basically your asset size isn't big enough. He said, come back when you grow your asset size a little bit. And they really looked at our asset size because it's based upon, they can provide you a certain amount of money based upon your asset size. And I was glad he was very upfront with me. And he gave me the parameters on which they could loan on at that time. So I don't know if that holds true there, Greg, on asset size, on how much they can loan based upon your asset size.
I do not know. I'd have to defer to our research department, and
Okay.
we'll let's list up a couple of questions, and I'll, like a punch list, and we'll try to sort of clear the decks there and get some of these things addressed for you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's just a guess, but my guess is that's maybe an internal bank underwriting risk decision.
Yeah.
And just to answer a question I saw in the chat, CRA does not currently apply to credit unions, but that's one thing that a lot of advocates are trying to change, because there are some credit unions that, like Navy Federal Credit Union, is more like a national bank, really. So that's something that may change in the next round of rules. We'll see.
One thing that I was going to mention, also going back to the point of community benefit agreements, that often we invite organizations when there is an opportunity, and like to sort of coordinate with you, Pete. And I think we're doing that to some extent, because there are new banks that we're working on. And that's when you kind of unfortunately, sometimes there is this disconnect between the regulatory forces, institutions, and then you have to work on a base by base, bank by bank, so to speak. And when we have a meeting with a bank, I think there is a big opening for organizations like yours to be at the table and talk about the issues that is affecting you, the lack of credit, the lack of lending, and all those things, and at the same time propose potentially what that bank could do in your communities or different regions. So I just wanted to sort of like open that up, as I extend that invitation, because it's going to keep coming up in terms of like meeting with banks, and I think that's a good way to sort of like put pressure on banks in a more direct way, I would say.
And I was going to say a lot of the challenges. I had a really good talk with Sheila Herrera last night about the challenges with just new home construction and dealing with Bureau of Indian Affairs and dealing with local permitting and the different code regs and lines of credit. It was a long conversation. I really learned a lot. So I think the elements of what's unique about Indian country, CRA needs to sort of embrace and engage with a little bit more. And we're more than happy to sort of take a shot at it, because it needs to be addressed. It's gone on too long.
And one thing that Greg is very good at, and I appreciate it, is giving me a call and saying, hey, we're working on a project in New Mexico, Colorado, Idaho. Do you have any native CDFI members there that I could speak to? So then I'll throw 2 or 3 names out to him. And so if you get a call from Greg, don't be surprised, but it's all been good. Lakota and I really appreciated you giving us a call on that. I'm going to call on one of our other members if she's available, Cindy Logston. Cindy, are you there?
Hey
There she
guys,
is.
yes, I'm here.
Have you gotten any CRAs?
We have not, I think it's banks still don't understand us quite. We have some relationships with some of the foundations at the bank, but we don't have, ones that have brought us credit or anything like that.
Okay. Like I said, a lot of and even like for me, the very first time that we got referred to First National Bank, it came through an event that I had attended, and I asked this gentleman to be on my loan committee. Well, then I've got a good relationship with him, and then he had CRA credits through them, and then he recommended me. So it's really kind of a networking thing to a certain degree, I think I found. Let me see who else is on here today. And Cindy Middlestead, are you available?
Good afternoon. I am. I just you may hear a disruption, so I apologize in advance. But
okay.
I have been in a prior capacity, have had successful relationships with banks and loans such as EQ2s and other low interest or low term as well. But it goes back to for me, and it's what Pete said. I had a 15+ year relationship with the CRA officer, and at that time was doing housing and neighborhood revitalization. So it's being proactive and just really establishing that relationship. And oftentimes if you have a really good relationship, the CRA officer is checking in as well, and wants to be involved and wants to know what's going on too.
And I think you hit it right on the head there, because for me, I had an opportunity last year to possibly get another CRA credit, but what I went to the dance with was something different than what they want, what their focus was. Their focus was going to be on small business, and I went there wanting to, maybe do some housing stuff. So, and I don't know if there's any way to find out where their focus is at. Is there, Greg or Juan or Catherine? Oh, you're on mute there, Juan or Greg.
Sometimes they'll say it in their annual reports, right? Sometimes they say the pertinent things out loud. Sometimes it'll be on their websites. Sometimes they'll be expecting, certain, like if you want grant applications, one part of the year, the bank will be asking grant applications for, community centers. And then the latter part of the year, they'll be asking only grant applications for community development. or community gardens. So banks try to be, I think, clear in communicating what their CRA priorities are. Sometimes you can tell it through their CRA exam, per the research and the deep dive that Catherine can engage in. But if you talk to the CRA officer or the loan officer or the folks at the bank, they should be able to, tell you. Some of them just have a philosophy. And once you find out what that is, that's the first step. But the relationship building component that you mentioned earlier is essential. I mean, sometimes you call up that loan officer, that CRA officer, and just say, how are things going? How's the family? Or, that way you're not just reaching out to them when you need something. It's relationship building with the bank.
Yeah, we went up to South Dakota here a couple of years ago, and they were providing a CRA for NCN. And honest to God, our conversation was about gardening, was about birds, and then at the end of the conversation, it was, okay, how much did I say I was going to give you? So there was a relationship, because you find out, about her husband being in the National Guard. She was in the National Guard, and just about her hobbies and her kids. And it was really a good relationship, and that's what it's all about. And even having your CRA credit officer get to know you and your family to a certain degree, it pays huge dividends if you really make it personal, because at the end of the day, they're there, they have the same goals as we do, they go home, have families. And so that's what it was about. It was an hour of talking about what we've been doing, and then, oh, by the way, how much did I say I was going to give you? So those are the conversations you like.
And just to finish that point, they have relationships and conversations with other banks. So they may know of another banker or another bank that's got an initiative that's good for you. So that's why it's important to establish relationship with your local bank and loan officers and relationships with banks writ large.
Does anyone else have any questions? Or go ahead, Juan. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I was going to make the point that also we have found out when we had those community benefit agreement meetings is that a lot of banks don't know what's going on in terms of like what organizations are working on and what is sort of like what's going on in different places. So I think sometimes there is a relationship building, and there is also like you gotta show visibility in some ways in some places. And I think it's also like I've seen that over and over where some banks didn't know anything about the community land trust, and all of a sudden we're talking community land trust in meetings, right? Because the organization came up and they're talking about that. Now those issues become known to the bank, and then they gain visibility through those meetings.
Well, what we want to do as NCN is have NCRC, become more involved with their organization, and really continue to work hard for the modernization of the CRA Act, and ask questions of why. It was an opportunity for me to be on the subcommittee for the Indian housing, and it was the new director of the OCC was leading it. So when you ask them just some pertinent questions, they wanted to know what we wanted to find out about banks, and that it was thrown out there, well, maybe we find out how many of the banks aren't serving Indian country. And naturally, I have to peep up every now and then and say things that might be uncomfortable, but we already know that they're not. The question is why? What are the obstacles? What are the challenges, and why aren't they? And a lot of times it goes back to staff turnover. There's staff turnover, and we just got to constantly keep re-educating and reconnecting with the new guy that's coming in. And so it's just a never-ending job of communicating and building relationships with banks. And I think the banks, I can understand their point, because we went on a tour in 2018 with the OCC, and I think Dante with NAFOA put it together down to New Mexico. And it was a busload of bankers and Native representatives from Indian country. And what we did is we toured the Pueblo Indian Reservation where they weren't being served. And at the end of the day, learning why the banks are reluctant, because they have regulators and exams and things of that sort. So it's a jigsaw puzzle that we have to keep working at, and eventually we're going to get it. But I want to thank Greg and Juan and Catherine for your time today. And I don't want this conversation to end. We need to have you back in a couple months. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be meeting with Jesse Van Tol, who is the CEO, I guess, of your organization and the leader. So it'll be interesting to get his perspective as well.
And your classmate.
Yeah, my old classmate. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
You bet. I appreciate
you.
it.
Right.
Thank you,
Take care, man.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
See ya.
everyone.